أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وارزقنا فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين اللهم افتح إلينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نعم بسم الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته Is that everyone on the, is there anyone else we're waiting for? Okay.
I think we can start. Yeah.
Okay, inshallah. So, inshallah, today I think we have an interesting subject to cover. I think everyone will find this very interesting. It's part of what we left off last week. And it's interesting because it's something that everyone can relate with on a day-to-day. It's actually interesting for three things. The first and most primary is if you're studying eschatology, this will help you understand the whole manipulation agenda and how the manipulation takes place. Psychologically and physiologically. And then the second thing is I think it was Saif, you had asked this question first or second session about the media, the psychological manipulation of the media. This section, inshallah, will help you understand how that works as well. And the third thing is going to be more of a personal thing for each and every individual, because I know everybody asks this question, how it is that the mind works. Not the mind, actually, the brain. So inshallah, the section we'll be looking at today is going to be the brain now. That's what he's going to talk about. And he's only given 3 lines as far as that is concerned. So even for our session, I mean, it's a very complex subject and it's not something that we can finish off just today. So what I'll go through today is more of just the basic concepts and how those concepts work. And it would be good for everyone to do your own research on the matter, on the subject, inshallah. So let's do the text first, and then I'll go into the actual mechanics of it, because he doesn't give the mechanics per se. So this is something that I've built it on the side for us to study for today. But it's the same thing. It's basically what he's talking about. And Ghazali is talking more in a metaphoric sense, in an allegorical sense. And so we will expand that more into a scientific sense. So the section that we were in last week was Wadhifatul Qalb, the virtue of the heart. And just to summarize that, he basically is providing you and telling you that the central most aspect of the human being, the crux of the human being, is his heart. And that the heart is the foundation of human psychology. In other words, the entire hierarchy internally is the hierarchy with the heart being set as being in charge. And that's its virtue. That's what it was created to do. That's its placement. So it was created to be that entity by which the being, who is you now, is able to govern yourself. And this goes back to that statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made to the angels, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, I am going to place in this ard, this material abode, a khalifa. Now, if you look at many of the translations of that word in context, they will say things like ambassador or vicegerent. I've seen vicegerent is the most common one. And this sort of presents the wrong image. It's, in my view, that's not the correct translation. Because the term itself is perceived in its political denotive and connotative, not denotive. Like vicegerent, you would think about it in the political landscape. So a lot of people have taken that ayah and said, oh, you see, this is what justifies, that the human being is actually made, we are supposed to establish Allah's khilafah in the world, like we are the successor, right, of His sovereignty, which is an incorrect way of looking at that. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need sovereignty, or does not need His sovereignty represented in the earth. He is Rabbul Alameen, and He is the sovereign, right? He's the one who rules everything. He doesn't need someone to do it for Him. The real translation, the best translation, I would say, if you understand vicegerent as a governor, the word governor would be the more appropriate translation in context there. Because what does the vicegerent do in this case? His task is to govern. Now, the word Khalifa in the ayah is in the nakira form. It's not in the ma'rifa form. It's not the Khalifa. It is a Khalifa. Means it's indefinite, means that the number of Khalifas is not specific. Like he's not placing specifically chosen individuals from a group of a collective of those individuals so that those specific ones govern the collective, right? The way it has been phrased is that every single individual in that collective is a Khalifa. So the question that you derive from that is, okay, what does this Khalifa do then? Because each and every individual cannot be a Khalifa for the other person, right? So the only logical conclusion you can draw from there is that the Khalifa in this case is somebody who primarily governs himself. And he governs himself, as Ghazali put it in the previous section, to rise from this lowest abode of matter and material to the highest of the high. And that's the comparative that the angels give in that ayah. أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Are you going to place someone there who is going to cause this corruption and is going to cause bloodshed? And the fasad is the attribute of the concupiscence. And the sifk, the bloodshed, is the attribute of the predatory or the irascible natures of the human being. So the very nature of this realm is what the angels were referring to, because it is blameworthy in its attributes. Now this is important. He's going to talk about this later on, inshallah, in another aspect. But it's important to understand what a quality of a thing is and what the creation of it is. So it's blameworthy in its qualities and attributes, but not in its creation. In its creation, the ard, the material world, the universe, is a praiseworthy creation. Why? Because Allah is the one who created it. And this is why you have that ayah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is accredited due to Allah. He is the Rabb of all the realms, including the material realm. So He's praised for His creation of this realm. So it's not blameworthy in its creation. It is blameworthy in its attribute because this is the nature of this realm. And that same nature corresponds to the base nature of the human being. And so giving that, the comparative of that the angels give, because this is the lowest, then the highest would be that station in which the angels occupy. The station of praise unto Allah and glorification. وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. Because we are on this level. This is what Ghazali says, حَتَّى يُسَافِرُوا عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الْعَالَمَ التُّرَابِ إِلَىٰ أَعْلَى إِلِّيِّينَ. So that the heart can journey on this vessel that it has been given from the lowest of the low, the realm of material, to the highest of the high. That is its virtue, because it is higher now in hierarchy. It is not a passive thing. A lot of Muslims regard the heart as a passive instrument. My heart feels and my heart senses and my heart this and all that stuff. and they only look at they look at the intellective aspect as the primary, or they look at the other aspects of their being as the primary. The heart is given like a side job. And this is reflective in society. You see this in society. You'll see Muslims giving more priority to worldly aspects, to their work or their investments, to all these other things, as compared to their worshipful acts. And even those worshipful acts are just performed in the motions of them, less in the spiritual embodiment of them. And then the same is reflected into how they treat their own children as well. You see, a lot of importance is given towards education, for instance, towards education that is of a secular nature, as compared to education and nurturing that is of a spiritual nature. So Ghazali is turning this whole thing around, and he's saying that the reason why people are not finding peace and tranquility, they're having all these psychological issues and problems that you're complaining about, is because your internal structure is not as it is supposed to be. You have to now understand what the internal hierarchy should be in order for you to fulfill that prime role of a Khalifa that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated for you. And for you to do that, you need to understand what is the hierarchy of governance. You have to know what the hierarchy of governance is, so that you are able to govern yourself in a proper structure. Otherwise, it's just haywire. It doesn't matter then the law or how much of the law you know. If your internal structure is not properly recognized, then your country is going to get destabilized. This dominion of yours will be destabilized. You see? So that's what now brings us to this other section here. It's part of the same section, and he continues now to elaborate the brain component. And then he's going to talk about the intellect later on. So it's important also to distinguish here. We're not talking about the intellect at this point. We're not talking about the mind. We're talking about the brain and how the brain functions, and its unique placement as it has been given to the human being. So he says, وَقُوَّ الْخَيَالِ فِي مُقَدِّمَ الدِّمَاغ كَالنَّقِيبِ يَجْمَعُ عِنْدَهُ أَخْبَارَ الْجَوَاسِيسِ. The frontal aspect or the component of the brain, that's where you find قُوَّ الْخَيَالِ, the imaginative faculty. So the imaginative faculty في مقدم الدماغ is in the front section of the brain. And he is like the chief who gathers information from his spies. So in allegory, the allegory that he gave, the spies were the senses, the jawasis, they're the senses. And it's a very unique comparative, because that's what jassa also means. Jassa means to probe, to like query, you see, and that's what the senses do. They probe reality for information. So he's like, this is the chief and he's gathering information. And I'll explain now in detail the different parts of the brain. That's what our subject is today, inshallah. وقوى الحفظ في وسط الدماغ مثل صاحب الخريطة يجمع الرقاع من يد النقيب ويحتفظها إلى أن يعرضها على العقل. And the power of preservation of memory is in the center of the brain. And he is like the map master, the guy who makes the map now. So he collects all the information that the senses have brought to the chief, and he starts putting the pieces together. This belongs here and this belongs here. This is what the eyes have seen and this is what the ears have heard and this is everything. So he starts building the maps so that all that collective information can be preserved and presented to the aql. So the aql can access this imago now. The map master is the one who is drawing everything, and he's making the form and the image so that it can be given to the aql for him to now make a decision on what needs to be done, or for him to interpret that and understand something by it. فإذا بلغت هذه الأخبار إلى الوزير يرى أحوال المملكة على مقتضاها. So that in this manner now, when the information reaches the vizier now, who is the aql, he is able to evaluate the states of the dominion and figure out, okay, what needs to be done. This is the input information. This is the requirement. This is the need. This is what has happened. This is the circumstance. so that it can make a decision on what needs to be done. فَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ وَاحِدًا مِّنْهُمْ قَدْ عَصَى عَلَيْكَ. So if you see that any one of these, from all these different departments, is rebelling against you, or is disobeying you, is not following the instruction that you've given, and that includes the bodily aspect as well. If there's some part of your body that's not responding, and the example he gives, مثل الشهوة والغضب, for example, the concupiscence or the ghadab, but also the other aspects of your body as well. فَعَلَيْكَ بِالْمُجَاهَدَةِ. Upon you is the struggle. Upon you is the struggle so that you can put the rebellion to ease. You need to respond immediately. You don't want it to get out of control. You don't want the situation to get worse. Whatever psychological trauma you have, whatever you're feeling, if there's an emotion, something that has triggered a distress, there's a thought, something is troubling you, something is bothering you, you don't want to sit on it. You don't want to bottle it up because it will get worse. It will end up getting diseased. You need to address it as soon as you possibly can. So upon you is the struggle. But وَلَا تَقْصِدْ فَقَتَلَهُمَا. Upon you is the responsibility, the struggle to suppress the rebellion. But you don't want to destroy the ones who are rebelling against you. You don't want to destroy the shahwa. You don't want to destroy the ghadab. They are important and they are vital to the sustainability of your dominion. So you want to suppress the rebellion. And now, how do you do that? How does a king, when his subjects are out in the streets rioting, how do presidents deal with uprisings in their nation? You can either use force, which is what a lot of them do. They use the police, against the citizens, or they bring in the military, and then what results from that? It's carnage. But there is another method that can be applied, which is a method that entails wisdom, internal wisdom, to negotiate, to bargain, come to the table. Let's discuss what's the issue, and then let's resolve the issue. Maybe there's a compromise that can be made. You see? Because sometimes people can put stringent rules upon themselves, and then their internal states will rebel against that. You see? And then you have a conflict. So maybe you need to be a bit more lenient on those rules that you've put upon yourself and give in a little bit. لأن المملكة لا تستقر إلا بهما. Because your dominion, the dominion cannot be stabilized, cannot be regulated without them. You need them. You need the concupiscence to regulate your appetites. You need the concupiscence to regulate your desires. You need the irascible to defend you from internal conflicts as well as external conflicts. You see, sometimes you need to get angry on yourself for your own stupidity. Otherwise, your own stupidity can destroy you. So you need that. If you suppress them completely, then you're just going to be a depleted individual. You will lack in so many things in which these two components are required. And that's going to be the discussion in the next section, inshallah. 3 things upon which sound contentment is built upon. He's going to talk about the overinflation of these components, and then the depletion of these components as well. فَإِذَا فَعَلْتَ ذَلِكَ كُنْتَ سَعِيدًا. If you do this, if you regulate them, and if you attend to their needs and requirements, and if you harmonize the imbalance within you and address the issues as soon as you can, you will find stability, you will find your contentment. وَأَدَيْتَ حَقَّ النِّعْمَةِ. You will then be able to fulfill the right of this ni'mah that Allah has given you. The chance to rise from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high. The chance to be a Khalifa worthy of His praise. وَوَجِبَتْ لَكَ الْخِلْعَةُ فِي وَقْتِهَا. And in due time, because it's a struggle. It's not like a switch, you do it once and it's done, khalas. It's a struggle. So in due time now, this robe of honor will descend upon you. وَإِلَّا كُنْتَ شَقِيًّا. وَإِلَّا كُنْتَ شَقِيًّا. And if you do not, you will be damned. because you're just going to destroy yourself. You'll destroy yourself. You will not be able to perform the function, the purpose you were sent here to perform. Your time is going to run out, and guess what awaits you once you pass away? You will be destroyed. وَوَجِبَ عَلَيْكَ النَّكَالِ وَالْعُقُوبَةِ. And all that will be waiting for you ultimately is chastisement and punishment. So that's the section, inshallah, and if we have time, we'll do the next session. But let's go through the section that I wanted to really focus on. Now, the thing I'm going to focus on mostly insofar as the brain is concerned is the memory. The brain has got many functions, but the real thing that I want to focus on is the memory, because the memory portion is what actually keeps the brain functioning best for the intellect to be able to acquire information, recall information, process information, associate information, and be able to convert that all into knowledge. And it's one of the things, it's the main thing that is actually manipulated by external forces. So one of the things that's manipulated is the information that's coming to you. That's one of the things that's manipulated. And then once that information has gone into you, it can be processed correctly, but then the other thing that will be manipulated is the memory of it. Because the formation of the image, the imago, that plays the most crucial role for the human being, because it is the filter between now the brain component and the intellective component. So you've got the external filter, which is the senses, and then you've got now a major internal filter, which is the imaginative faculty. That's where the memory component is largely manipulated. So let's go through the components. Now, I don't have a chart, so you're going to have to do this on your own. I didn't do this deliberately. I want you to build your own chart and expand on it, because there are many components. I'm just going to give you a few basic highlights of this. So when it comes to memory, you've got memory, then you've got two aspects to it. You've got short-term memory, and then you've got long-term memory. Short-term and then long-term memory. Short-term is not that much of an issue. I'll explain the component that is applied to that. Long-term memory, that's where we'll focus mostly on. Long-term memory, you've then got a division of that. You've got explicit memory, and then you've got implicit memory. Explicit memory and implicit memory. Explicit memory, just by the definition of the terms, is what's like obvious or evident. And implicit is what's not obvious, but it's there. It's sort of just understood by, you see? And then you've got, in the explicit memory, you've got what's known as episodic memory and then semantic memory. Episodic memory regards things like occurrences, events, happenings, what's going on. So you're there, you're in an environment, and something is happening. That happening is stored as an explicit memory, which is episodic. It's the episode, right? And this is a world of occurrences and happenings. It's a world of occurrences. So every moment that unfolds in this world, something is happening. Whether you're aware of it or heedless of it. So like one of the questions you could ask is like, for example, if a tree falls in the forest and you obviously didn't hear it or see it, did it actually happen? Did it actually happen? Do you think it happened? Right? You don't know, right? So you don't know for sure whether it's happened or it's not, but it happened. You could go there later on and see the fallen tree. So there is an occurrence that took place at a moment when you were idle. So even though from your perspective nothing was happening, something was still happening in the world, right? It's like Schrodinger's cat. You don't know for sure because it's obscured from you. You don't know if it's alive or dead. There's a probability that it happened and there's a probability it didn't happen. So there's always an occurrence, and so the memory remembers the event. That's the portion of the memory, that's the episodic. So every moment that you are aware or awake, you absorb information of what is taking place. Now this goes hand in hand with semantic memory, and semantic memory deals with the world or the environment now, where the thing is happening and what are the surroundings now? What is the stage like? The props of what is happening. So for example, if you go to, let's say, like a national reserve or something, and then there's a hunt taking place. So the episode there, the occurrence is the hunt that is taking place. There's one animal like that's taken down another animal and it's feeding on that. That's the episode. That's what's happening, the occurrence. And then the semantics are those things that surround that. So you've got like the grass, and then you've got a stone there, and then you've got, let's say, a tree over there, and then you've got the sky and the clouds. And so that's the environment. Those are the semantics. Now, this component is very unique because, like, if you read any story, for example, if you read any story, any novel, you basically have three components to storytelling. You've got the characters, you've got the world, and then you've got the plot. So the characters in the world, those associate with the semantic aspect of a memory. And then the plot associates with the occurrences. So the plot is what's telling you this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened sequentially. And you need all those three to formulate a complete image. If one of those is manipulated, then the imago will be false, right? Right, so and then you have implicit memory. Implicit memory has got two components as well. You've got priming, and then you've got procedural. Procedural is that which is algorithmic. So you've got functions now. The brain learns certain functions that are sequential. One process to the next process to the next process, one event to the next event to the next event. And those algorithms are set into your brain so that whenever there is a prompt for it, those processes can be recalled and followed procedurally. And this again contributes to also your episodic memory and your, so if something happened, for example, you store that in memory, the procedural memory or component will also store the same thing but in a different format so that the two can be associated together. So in terms of the happening, the sequence of what has been happening is put in order because it has to abide by the unfolding of time. See, time plays a crucial role in all aspects of our existence. And time is so we measure time based on events. We've got this strange perception now whereby we think that time is measured based on the clock. So we look at the clock and we measure time accordingly. But that's just an instrument that gives you a reference point. The real measurement of time is based on events. So you've got this world is a world of events, right? It's always occurring something. So you've got events that are happening in the micro level, for example, in terms of the human world is concerned. But then you've got events that are taking place on a cosmological sense. So you've got events that are taking place, let's say, on Earth. As far as Earth is concerned, you've got geological events, you've got ecological events, right? You've got like the seasons, for example. Those are all events that are taking place. And then you've got events taking place on a planetary level. So you've got each planet from the point of observation will have like a cycle in which it will go through and then come back to the same point. So that's an event. And then you've got events that are taking place on like the sun, for example. Now the sun is the best example because the sun, its cycle of sunrise to sunset and then back again, its cycle helps you measure one full daily cycle. So that's an event. And so you take that as a marker, and then it happens again, you take it as marker 2, it happens again, marker 3, 4, 5, and then it takes a complete cycle of a yearly cycle, which is paired with like how the seasons turn as well. So you have winter, actually it should start with spring, the cycle would start with spring, summer, autumn, winter, and then spring again. So that's another cycle, that's an event. So these are all markers. And then you've got events taking place on a cosmological level, like the stars and the placement of the stars, the constellations and all these things, right? So that's how we measure time, and time plays a component insofar as how your brain will also function in organizing events and recalling them chronologically. That's where these two components will come in, these two types of memory. The explicit and the implicit are long-term memories, and the explicit is what is tangible, like what you could physically see, like with your physical sight, or you could hear something happening. And then the implicit is basically the bullet points of what happened. It's like the writing of it, the background information, right? Now, so that's procedural. And that procedural memory also helps towards things like motor skills. So each motion of the body has got an algorithmic function. And that algorithmic function has to be entrained into the brain so that it becomes embedded as a memory. Like brushing your teeth, for example, there's a process to that, right? You clean your toothbrush, you put the paste, and then you start. So whatever it is that you will do in terms of all those motions, it's imprinted into you, but it takes time. It has to be learned. So the neurons have to be fired, and then it will lose out, and then you try it again. So going through like your childhood and stuff, you keep on forgetting how to do things until it eventually becomes a part of you. And the same case applies whenever you're learning a new skill. You try it and then you forget part of the process or something, and then you try it again, and then you try it again until it becomes part of you. Memorizing, like the Quran, for example. Memorizing the Quran, you will start one word, and then you'll maybe miss out in between, or you'll skip something, or you'll forget one word and it will put like a stopper on you. You won't be able to continue. But if you keep on repeating it, then that will embed the algorithm of it. You see, because that's how language functions for the human being. Language has that order, and then each word is translated internally. Each word that you execute on your tongue, as far as the semantic form of language is concerned, is embedded into your mind to your brain with a certain order, like a syntax. So when somebody speaks out of order, like if I say, came, went, chair, he sat, and if I use words like that, it doesn't make any sense. I have to give them in the order, because in your brain, the order has been embedded for that particular language. So what I'm saying doesn't make sense to you. I have to use the proper order. I have to say he came and sat on a chair and then went. You see, something like that. This is the manipulation of it would be done via language. I'll talk about that in a short while. Let me go through all these components. Then you've got the priming. Priming is mostly associative. So each of these long-term memories, they're set in you, but you need something that will trigger that memory. You need something that will recall it. So it is typically associated with something else, something that will help you remember that. So in terms of memorizing the Quran, for example, you memorize the entire surah, but then you're not able to bring it out on the immediate, and then somebody reminds you by just giving you the first word, for example. And then you pick up the first word, and that triggers the rest of the memory. That's priming it. Priming the memory that associates with that is very important, because it helps you recall using other elements. Like for example, I don't know if anyone has ever done this in school. I used to do this. I used to chew gum of a certain flavor while doing my revisions, and then in the exam I would chew the same gum with the same flavor, so that flavor would remind me or bring me back to the memory of what I had revised. So that's priming, using a trigger in this case to help you remember something else. So you've got different parts of the brain that do these different roles, the implicit and the explicit types of memory. You've got what's the largest part of the brain, that's called the cerebral mantle or cerebral cortex. It's the gray matter now. It's the outward portion of it. And this is divided into 4 components, both on the left and the right side. You've got the frontal lobe, and then you've got the temporal lobe, then you've got the parietal lobe, and then you've got, at the very rear, you've got the occipital lobe. Now, in the frontal part of it, of this whole cortex, you've got now the frontal lobe, and that's what Ghazali is referring to in that first line. وَقُوَّ الْخَيَالِ فِي مُقَدِّمَ الدِّمَاغِ كَالنَّقِيبِ في مقدمة. So the muqaddimah, the dimagh, the frontal portion of the dimagh, that's the frontal lobe. Now it's very interesting that he's talking about these 2 components, because these are the 2 components which can be manipulated to cause you distress. So if you're not attentive of what's coming into these 2 components and what's being processed in these 2 components and how it is being preserved, you're bound to put yourself into a position whereby you would be caused distress. You would be given certain triggers that will cause you to react in certain manners. This frontal portion, the frontal lobe, has got 2 main components. There is the prefrontal cortex, and that deals with your short-term memory. Now, short-term memory is just momentary. It's only information that is acquired and held on for a few seconds to maybe a few minutes, and then it's discarded. It's not kept or retained, unless now the mind intervenes, the intellect intervenes and says, no, this is information I need to keep. So for example, you meet somebody, a stranger, and you greet each other, and then you ask them, what's your name? And I say, my name is so-and-so. And you say, okay, my name is so-and-so. And then you have a brief conversation, and then you part. Now, the chances are you will not remember that name. You probably discard, unless you're paying attention, unless your intellect is active, your mind is active in that moment to say, I need to remember this person's name. And then so you keep on repeating it a few times, your mind repeats it a few times until it moves from short-term memory into long-term memory. Otherwise, the chances are that you're going to ask that person again, what did you say your name was? Or remind me your name? You'll ask something like that. That's a memory that you will keep only for that moment while it's useful, and then you discard it. So things like tasks, for example, working tasks, Let's say you're setting the table, you know where the plates are and the spoons and everything are in the kitchen. That's part of your long-term memory. You've committed that to memory. But while you're doing the task of taking, carrying, and bringing it to the table, you're not going to exert or hold that information for too long. You just need to memorize a little bit as far as your task is concerned. Right? It's a functional memory. It's just there for the moment, and then it goes. And then you've got the neocortex. The neocortex is the main channel in which all the senses, information, sensory and actuatory information passes through the neocortex. So all the information that your senses acquire will come into the neocortex, and this is where now the sorting is going to take place. And then what's to be kept insofar as it being short-term, and what's to be kept insofar as long-term, that's where the filtration will take place. This is also where your motor skills are actuated in the immediate sense. Like let's say there's a fly buzzing around, your sense picks that up. The ear picks up that sound. And the brain recognizes it as, or the mind in this case will actually recognize it as an irritation. So the mind will actuate the brain, and the brain is going to actuate the hand to, let's say, flick it off. That motor skill, that actuation. So the sense is the sensory, and then the reaction to that is the actuatory. Language and speech executed in the moment as it is demanded is also done through this portion. So you meet someone, they ask you a question, it's not like you thought out the answer a long time ago and then prepared for it, unless you knew what the question was, but they ask you a question momentarily and then you need to respond to that. So in that moment, the words that you will use, those will be executed by the neocortex. So whenever you want to speak, That's the portion that becomes active. So the prefrontal cortex deals with short-term memory. The neocortex deals with explicit memory because it's dealing with the tangible reality, the information and what the senses are perceiving and bringing in, right? Then you've got two groups of the parts of the brain that deal exclusively with implicit memory and explicit memory. So the first group is the ganglia, the basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. The basal ganglia is responsible for coordinating sequences. So you've got that procedural memory. That's what the basal ganglia is responsible for. It coordinates the sequences of things that need to be done or things that need to be responded to or things that are received and in the order in which they are received. That syntax is coordinated or regulated by that component. The cerebellum is in the very back of the brain, and it has a connection to the medulla oblongata. The cerebellum is responsible now for fine-tuning what the frontal portion of the brain does. So the frontal portion of the brain just does things as and when they are required. The rear portion of the brain is what deals with fine-tuning those things. So fine-tuning the motor functions, fine-tuning the speech pattern. So the clarity of speech. So somebody who is, let's say, a qari, who has, really mastered the harf and its pronunciation, its utterage, its makhraj, that person has gone through a process of practice and fine-tuning. Somebody who's new will still be able to recite the Quran, but not as well as the qari who has refined it. That's the portion of the memory of the brain that works with that memory. Also, the finer functions of the motor functions, the motor skills. And then you've got the two components that deal with explicit memory. This is the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala deals with the semantics, the world, and then the hippocampus deals with the occurrences, what's happening in the world. And these two function together. And then you've got the medulla oblongata. This is responsible for your organ functions and your reactive motions. Like when you sneeze, when you cough, you feel this vomit coming out. The body does its own reactions, as it's like a base program. So when you're sick, for example, your coughing and your sneezing and your runny nose and all these things this is not something that you're doing consciously. This is something that your body does regardless. Now, you can override that to a certain limit. Like you can stifle a yawn, or you can hold back a sneeze, or you can muster the cough. You can override to a certain degree, but not so much, because the body will have to do what it needs to do. And you also can intervene and sort of bring it back, because the body can end up coughing too much and cause damage to itself, because what it's doing is, like if there's a viral infection or something, the body is reacting to this foreign substance and it's trying to expel it from the body. So, the cough is like if the virus is, let's say, in the back of the throat, the coughing is trying to expel it, to try and cough it out. Or if it's in the nasal area, the sinuses will fill up and it will start trying to drain out from the nose to try and wash it out. Or the sneeze will try to puff it out. Or the fever will be triggered to raise the temperature of the body to kill the virus. So you have to be careful now. Also, this is where the external intervention comes in. Not to let the fever go too much, too high, because it can have other detrimental effects on the body. So they'll try to bring the fever down, like putting a wet cloth on the head or something like that. Right? So you can override some of those functions as well. Now, so those are just in general, and I think I went through it a bit too quickly. So we'll wait for you guys any questions if anybody did not understand any of these components. But it's a good idea to do your own study on these. I think you may have to go back and maybe review the video, the lecture, and go through it again and come again. Okay, so I've been given the indicative. No, we still have 10 minutes, don't we? No? No, we still have 10 minutes. Or am I seeing that incorrectly? We start at 4:30. Okay. All right, so we have 15 more minutes to go, inshallah. So some of these functions, okay, I wanted to talk about the manipulation of it. Now, remember what he said about we said about the imago, the image that is being imprinted. Now, think about somebody who's reading a book. You're reading a book, you're reading a story. You're looking at the words, and those words are symbols because that's language, right? And we say that the human being functions on language by his very nature, spiritual nature, not just bodily or ethereal nature, spiritual nature. Because the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did after presenting this Khalifa is He gave him the ability to name things. And it is through the naming of things that the knowledge is acquired. And it is through that knowledge that understanding is acquired. And it is through that understanding that the being can rise from the lowest to the highest. So language plays the fundamental role in all aspects of your existence. And so there is a language that is external in this realm, the language that deals with information. Then there is a language that is internal between the components, the physical components. So within the brain, there is a certain language. It's not a language of words. It's not a language of symbols or a language of, English or Arabic or that. It's a language that is unique to it, the firing of neurons and them communicating with each other. And then there is a language between the brain and the rest of the components communicating with each other. Then there is a language that is translated from that into the language of the mind. There's this conversion that takes place. And this is what the Arabs used to say, like in Arabic, you've got like the 3-letter root words. Some of the root letters, if you turn them, like if you interchange their positions, they can give you different meanings but related. So one of the meanings of the word Araba in the classical sense, its original meaning used to be language. Araba was language. Later on it became identified, okay, it's Arab. It's the Arabs. But Araba meant language. Now, if you take Araba and you replace the Ra with the Ba, you switch the two around, you get Abara. Abara means to cross over, right? Ad-dunya ma'baratun. A ma'bara is a place of crossing, like a bridge. So language has the ability to help an individual cross over from one state to another. And so that's what it's doing internally in the mind, the aql. There's a crossing over from a semantic, tangible form into an essential form, into meaning, crossing over from form into meaning. That's what Muhammad ibn al-Habib in his poetry, and I love that line. I always cite that line. إنما الكون معاني قائمة بالصور كل من يدرك هذا كان من أهل العبر. It's the same word, ibar. Whoever understands that the world is erected as meaning with form, as an external facade, to understand that means that you cross over from the form into the meaning of it. Those are the people of ibar, who can discern meaning from form, who can separate the two, to say that this has an essence and you take the essence of a higher value than the form itself. So, and then you've got the language from the intellect into the heart, which is the language that converts now what has been interpreted into an understanding. And so language plays this fundamental role in human existence, which means that for you to be in tune with reality, the best medium that you can use is language. And unfortunately, it is also the medium that is used to manipulate perception of reality. Because that's what media is. Media is from the word medium. It's a media. It's that which facilitates the transformation of one into another. The ibar. Right? Language facilitates the transformation of one into another. And that's what media is. It is a transformation of this person's ideology into this other person's ideology. So you've got a group of people who are sitting up there, the powers that be, right? They're up there and they've decided that we are not going to follow the sovereignty and the law of God Almighty. We are going to establish our own law and we are going to reshape reality into our image. We don't want him anymore. Now what is that called? That is called uluwan kabira. In Surah Al-Isra, you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines the fasad of the Jews twice, marratain, twice, when they reached a height of arrogance. The height of arrogance, that kind of fasad that is described there, is challenging divine ordinance. And you can only reach so far. You actually can't go further than that. You will be brought back down. But it is the height of reaching a position whereby you challenge the law of God Almighty. And you challenge it by saying, I'm going to change it. And so these are the people who are sitting up there, and that's their agenda now. That's their prime agenda, to reshape reality per their worldview. But obviously they can't do it themselves. Who's going to break the stones to build the buildings? Who's going to saw all the wood? Who is going to carry the wheelbarrows? Who is going to run all the systems? Who's going to clean the workshop floor? They're not going to do it. They need others to do it. They need the common folk to do it. But then how do you get the common folk to work so that the common folk also are working towards that same purpose, without them knowing that it's that purpose? In other words, what God Almighty has set down as an ordinance of function is the natural law. But what they want to create is an artificial law. Now, human nature will immediately reject that which is artificial. They will immediately reject that. How do you get the common population, the masses in this case, to accept that ideology and to accept it in a way that makes them believe that this is a natural progression? Whatever it is that they're going to contribute towards in terms of the role that each individual is playing in their job, in their career, in this company or that company, in this corporation and this industry and everything, wherever your placement has been, for the people who decided that placement for you, based on your certificate and your degree that you got, wherever your placement might be, how do you make them believe that this placement was each individual's own choice and that the ideology is the same ideology I have, and that this, whatever it is a natural progression, right? Because you've got, this is reality. I'm not making this up. You've got so many Muslims who think that cryptocurrency is a natural progression towards money and finance and all that. You've got Muslims who are thinking that artificial intelligence is a natural progression. We can use AI to teach Quran, and we can use AI to do this, and we can use AI to do that. You've got all these fatwas now coming up. Was it last year? Well, who was it? Sheikh Sudais was wearing those virtual goggles, saying now we can have virtual Hajj. It's there, and they posted it on their website, the Haramain website. Rahimahullah. I still respect him. He's a wonderful Qari. I love his recitation. I still listen to his recitation. But here's the delusion of it, you see. They're not aware that these are ideologies that have been implanted into their minds. They think that this is something that we have naturally thought out ourselves. And this is the natural progression in which the world is headed towards. So the bigger question is, the fundamental question is, I don't want to take up too much time with philosophies here, because this is something we would actually discuss in the course of modernity into postmodernity. So inshallah, if you ever vote for that, then we'll come to that and we'll discuss it in more detail. The fundamental question is, how do you, sitting up there, part of this whole organization, with all the wealth and resources at your feet, you can do almost anything you want, implement any program you want. How do you get the masses to accept and to play their part like obedient slaves? You need to manipulate their perception of reality. And how do you manipulate perception of reality? is you manipulate it by the medium in which information comes in and in which information is stored. So they've got many other channels. Many of the channels or mediums now are all belonging to them. This is why they have a hegemony of this. Like books, for example, academia, textbooks, all the textbooks in the whole world printed and published by all the major universities, used in all the major universities. I'm not talking about the village college or something like that. I'm talking about accredited institutions. All the textbooks that they are used, they are all published by one global conglomerate, one single company in the world. And you can do your research on that to find out. It's called Pearson's Publishing. One single company controls all the publishing of all the academical textbooks in the world. So you've already captured that portion because people do read. And then you look at television stations. You have hundreds of thousands of television stations. All of them across the world are probably owned by 4 or 5 of them. I don't know how many, but 4 or 5 of them. 4 or 5 companies own all the television stations in the world. The same goes for radio. The same goes for news and print, whether it is paper or digital. The same goes, even food now, food is owned. All the companies in the world of all these processed food that you'll find in the supermarket, why do they call it supermarkets? So that you can get everything in one place only. And everything in that one place, 90% of all the products you see on the shelves are owned by maybe 3, 4 or 5 companies. And you can do your study on that and look that up. This is not conspiracy, this is fact, this is real. You see? So they already controlled the medium. Now, it's not just about owning the medium, it's about how the medium is presented. And this is where now the individual has to be conscious. Because the individual, in his own stupidity, will accept the medium. Now, when you're reading something, as compared to, let's say, when you're watching something, there's a huge difference of how that affects the way your mind will perceive reality. 5 more minutes. Just give me 5 more minutes. Okay, 5 more minutes. When you're reading something, you're reading a book. I'm a writer, I'm an author, so I've written many stories and I've published, so far I've just published 1, so I'm hoping to publish more. But I know how the writing is done, and I mentioned 3 components, right? I mentioned what goes into a story, the world, the characters, and the plot. That's your 3 basic components, your 3 basic ingredients with other stuff in there, side plots and this, that, and the other. So those are the 3 components that when you're reading something, abstracting reality, you're abstracting from the symbol directly. This is what you're doing when you're reading. Your mind is doing that, you're abstracting from the symbol. This word means this word means that. Now, all those words, they'll mean something to one person, they'll mean something else to another person. They'll mean something else to another person. So the map maker, in this case, the memory, right, who is taking all this information that you're reading and abstracting, is constructing an image for your mind to interpret, the imago. The image that's in your mind is not the same as the image in my mind. And it's not the same as the image in anybody else's mind. If you read, for example, the description of a character, he had short hair, a pointy nose, and a scar on his face, and he was tall and thin. So those are the descriptives of the character. Now the character that's painted in your mind is not the same that's in my mind. It's not the same as in anybody else's mind. Now what happens when you take that and you replace it now with a pre-generated image? So if you read a book and you read that book, there's a certain imagination that you have about understanding what that book is telling you. And this I think everyone has experienced this in one way or another. When you then watch a film that is adapted of that book, it throws you off. Why does it throw you off? Because that image is now replacing the image that was generated naturally in your mind. It's not because it's different, because film cannot, that's why it's called a film adaptation. It's an adaptation. It's not the exact same thing. So the sequences will be altered and the way the story is told will be changed. But the image of the characters, the image of the world setting, the sequence of events, the way they take place, all that was generated in your mind in a natural process has been altered and is being replaced. This is the thing that many people fail to understand. It's being replaced. The natural processes of the mind are being replaced by forced imagery. Means that instead of your mind and your brain working in its natural progression, it is being given a fixed image in which it has got no inflection of language. In other words, your internal language has got no room and has got no fluidity. Because I guarantee you, if you read a book once, you will have a certain understanding. If you read that book, same book again, your understanding will change. There'll be more you'll be able to abstract. And then the next time you read it, you will abstract more. And so on and so forth. But when you do that with a film, unless it's a really good film, like the storytelling is amazing, the way it's been done, a majority of the film and imagery you will look at, you will only look at once, maybe twice. That's it. You don't get anything more from that. The image is so bland that it doesn't allow you or your mind room for inflection. The same case applies to music that's generated. The same case applies to all the news and all the other information that is being given to you. It is being force-fed to you. This is how it is manipulated, because it's the medium itself is being controlled, but then what's being embedded into the medium now, that changes certain things. It will change your priming, for example. It will change your reactionary, the things that you associate memory with, or the things that will prompt you to react in a certain way. It will change all those things. In other words, they can incline you towards this direction or that direction simply by giving you these small snippets through the mediums that they already control. They tried an experiment like this a couple of years back at a park in New York. I don't know what the park is called. It's one of those big parks. They went out they took a sample of 100 people and they split into two groups. So one group went out and gave certain people a cold cup of coffee and said, could you hold on to this for a second for me? And they pretended like they will tie their shoe or they'll make a phone call or something. So the person will be standing there holding that cup of coffee, cold cup of coffee. And then the other group went out to another batch of people, different, and gave them a hot cup of coffee, right? And did the same thing for a few seconds or so, 30 seconds or so, not long, 20, 30 seconds. Hold on to this for me. And they went away. About half an hour later, another group of individuals, the researchers, went in now with clipboards and started asking all these people who were given cups of coffee to read 2 or 3 paragraphs and to answer a question about what they thought of the main character in that passage. And the results were amazing, astounding results. Those who were given the cold cup of coffee, they said that they found the character to be, to be reserved, to be introverted, not responsive, to be like dark or possibly deceitful. And those who were holding the hot cup of coffee, they said that they found the character to be very friendly, to be very welcoming, to be very loving. Now, it's the same passage. Why is this group saying differently than that group? Because both the groups have been primed. And there is a certain associative memory that has been priorly implanted into each group, so that whatever information is presented later on is the same information, but then that group behaves differently and that group behaves differently. This is the manipulation. The researchers in this case represent those who control the medium in which the information is transmitted, because they controlled the initial prime. They're the ones who went out and gave the hot cup and the cold cup. And then they control also the passage and the question that would trigger a response. They're the ones who are controlling the medium. in which this information and the ideology is transferred from their mind into the mind of the greater population. I am now overboard my time. So, inshallah, we'll stop here. Like I said, this is not a subject that we can continue and we can finish it in one session. This could go on for quite a while in terms of discussion. So, we'll stop here, inshallah. And then next week, we will look at the three things upon which felicity and contentment, or in our case now, sound psychology is built upon. The depletion of these three components and the overinflation of these three components, and what is just and what is in balance and how to maintain that balance. That's going to be our discussion next week, inshallah. So let's take a quick break at this junction and then we'll resume for questions and answers. Jazakumullahu khairan. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum. See you in a bit. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Naam. Let's go. Questions and answers and discussions. Is there anything from the chat box? I can't see anything.
I have one question here.
Yes, go ahead, inshallah. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
It's about these last two paragraphs, what we read yesterday. Today, it's about Faiza Raita Wahidan, and then it's on the next line, it's Laika bin Mujahida. So it's this Anta thing. So who is this Anta? Is it Aql or is heart?
No,
or
it's
the person itself?
It's you now. It's you. He's addressing you, the individual, directly.
Is it a being?
As in you, the reader. So he's addressing. This is a technique that's used in Arabic. He's shifting from the third person to the first person. It's called iltifad. It's a rhetorical device. So he's addressing you as the reader directly.
Yeah. Raita means like what you see. This is something I get it. But I mean, what this Raita is here, is it like the Aql, or it's the heart, or it's the being?
It's the being, yes. It's the being. Yes, you the being now. If you see this internal whatever, then you have to address it.
So it's the quality of the heart that decide.
Come again?
That make the decision. The quality of the heart is to make the decision.
Yes. So your will and your consciousness is in your heart, and so that's the point of all decision making. Mahalla niya al qalb, the place of the niya, which is the point origin of all action that would be prompted. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Innamal a'malu bin niyat." All actions are contingent on the niyyah. So everything external in terms of what you do originates from the point of where the intention is formed, which is the heart. So the heart is the decision maker. And you are basically you are in the heart. So you could say that you are the heart, but that would not make any sense because it's still an extension of you as the being. We'll talk about the being, inshallah, when we come to Imam al-Haddad's text, like what the being is. And yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. In the meantime, there was a question that was sent to me before, and where is it? Yes, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Sir, there was a time, not long ago, when the elders in the family, they used to remember dates by events, like you said. For
Yes.
example, somebody was born and they used to be like, there was a time of solar eclipse or
Yeah.
something. They never used the calendar as such. So it was a major events. And when I was studying family structure and communications, so what they told us was when we visit the people who are not so well educated in modern terms, then that is how you get information from them, because
Yes.
they will remember things according to events or solar cycles or major events, worldly events or political events. And that was not too long ago. That was just maybe a generation or two ago.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. It's basically the fitra way of doing things, and in fact, this also goes back during the Prophet's time. In fact, the Hijri calendar that we're using was developed during, I believe, it was developed during Umar's time, and it was just in order to keep track of things. It was not meant to serve as the prime count of time. And prior to that, even then, the scholars, even throughout the generations, they would still refer to specific years or dates in terms of the event, the major event that took place. Like the year of the elephant is the most common known, right? It's the year of the elephant, and that's when the army attacked the Kaaba. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, in fact, in our language, my mother tongue, we don't have a calendar. Which is I'm quite astounded with that myself. We don't have a calendar. We don't have dates. Even when we speak in our language, we refer to events that took place to associate, this took place at that time. Remember, this was the year in which this had taken place. So it's very astounding. This is, if we were doing the course on time and cosmology, this is one of the subjects we would discuss. It would fall under the topic of the mechanization of time. To reduce it into some sort of a mechanical, quantitative based thing, whereas in reality it is supposed to be qualitative. Yeah, good. That's a very good observation.
That changes of the strike of the 12 o'clock strike.
Yeah, like the day.
Has to be,
Yeah.
It doesn't like.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, it's not associated with reality at all. At all, it's not associated with reality. Like a new day in Islam does not begin with sunrise. It doesn't begin with 12 o'clock midnight. It doesn't. It's completely arbitrary, and it was developed by the West. Because, like we said, the language itself facilitates a reality that is material, right? So everything is done from a materialistic point of view, including now perception of reality or time in this case.
And like you said, to change from analog to digital, the on and off switch.
Exactly. This is part of the whole transformation from modernity into postmodernity, right? I mean, we're turning into a digitized or a digital people now. We're not analog in that sense anymore. In fact, the word analog is used in conventional speech in a derogatory manner against those who are sort of outdated or old-fashioned. And that's used in language now. This person is analog. He's old-fashioned.
And secondly, the thing that you said about the perception, a lot has happened by changing the history. So Muslims and even other people, they're brainwashed to get a false version of history, so as to create some kind of hatred towards one another.
Yes.
And in other cases, to forget what our past was. So we are so misinformed and reading the books that, like you said, even the books are manipulated. So the history that we read in school or maybe even afterwards or from various sources, so it just creates a misinformation of all sorts.
Oh yes, definitely. Because I mean, it's not something new, by the way. These psychological manipulations have been done for eons. It's something that human beings do. Ibn Khaldun complained about this in the first 3 paragraphs of his Muqaddimah on world history. He straight off complained about this, that history is written by historians who are themselves historians, and are giving their version of it, but disassociated from the philosophy of what makes history transpire. In other words, they don't take into account the ideologies that brought in the actual occurrence that you document in history. So yeah, you've got the factual information, but that fact can be interpreted in any way. And because they control the medium, they also control the manner in which you're going to interpret those facts. And it's been done. I mean, one of the monumental things that struck a huge blow on the world of Muslims was the transformation of and the abolishment of the Ottoman Empire. People don't, I mean, even Turks, they don't think about this as much. But one of the things that they did, the Freemasons and their stooge, Mustafa Kemal, was to change the Turkish script from what they were using, what's known as Osmanli, to the Latinized version. So overnight, an entire population was illiterate. Overnight. Now, they are trying to revive the Osmanli script because their own people are disassociated from their own history because they can't read those books. So all the books that have been written of history, or translated in this case, have been manipulated to present a false image. Many of the books that were written between 1924 coming up until the recent 1990s painted the Ottoman Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, in very negative light. Like they were destroying the Turkic people. And the same case come out from like the Saudi government. They painted the Ottomans as enemies of Islam. All this Wahhabi movement came out and started publishing their books. They've done that to even scholarly works. I went to the museum in Istanbul and I looked at a text written by Imam al-Ghazali, his Munqidh min al-Dalal. They had one of the manuscripts that was handwritten. And there was a page, and I took a snap of that page. And then I looked at a digitized PDF that was published by Darussalam. And there were discrepancies between what was in the Darussalam publication as compared to the original manuscript. I mean, they've literally omitted entire sentences from the text just because it didn't agree with them. But then guess what's now presented to the people? It's a manipulation of falsity. And they do it openly now. I mean, there's nobody who challenges them. It's a very strange world we live in. But yeah, you're absolutely right. This is exactly what they're doing.
Even today, I know people who don't know the day of their birthday.
I had one more question I posted on YouTube.
Yes, could you repeat that question? Could you ask the question again?
Okay. I said that sometimes when we get into a conflict unknowingly, and like you explained, we end up between justification and guilt. So when our interactions are limited, it is easier to control our emotions. But when our interactions are in strange boundaries, for example, with neighbors or with people we don't know, or we know at a very formal level, then sometimes we get into conflicts. For example, I'll give you an example. For somebody, like I have a neighbor, suppose, and they are parking their car in the wrong spot, and every day the same thing is going on, right? So if I tell them not to do it, then they're probably going to, since they're causing inconvenience in the first place, so they're going to react in a like in a bad way, for a lack of word.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, suppose we lose our temper, then all the work that we did on ourselves, we work towards establishing a balance in our family, amongst ourselves. But when we interact with strangers and something like this happens, then the whole thing gets disturbed.
Yeah,
So should we limit our interaction and not get into conflict with people, or just ignore things that are not nice?
well, it depends on who those people are and what they relate with. Like what's your relationship with them? Generally, it's much more complex than to give a straightforward answer on that. But something like that specific example, like your neighbor, for instance, I mean, primarily, you're supposed to already have a friendly relationship with your neighbor. That's one of the directive from the Prophet ﷺ anyway, right? That friendly relationship can ease or break the ice between any conflicts that you may have to resolve. So if they're parking in your spot, for example, and you don't like it, obviously, then you need to have some segue into opening up a conversation. If you just tell them plain out, blanket outright, don't do that. Like, this is my spot, it's not yours. You do yours, I'll do mine. Obviously, they're going to get upset and offended. And then likewise, you're going to get upset and offended. You see, he's showing me his face. He's showing me now who he really is. That's not... Human relationships are very subtle and they're very sophisticated. And there has to be a way to sort of blend it in together. Yeah.
To be more nicer to strangers than our own relatives.
Yeah, and the first instance, the first impression you want to create about yourself, because you can only change your own behavior, by the way. This is an axiom. You cannot change the behavior of other people. You can only change your own behavior. And each individual can only change their own behavior. So ideally, the impression that you will create about yourself is that I'm a nice person, I'm an accommodating person, and I'm a friendly person. And I can be reasonable if you are also going to be reasonable. And then it's upon the other person, if they want to accept it or not. And, you'll find a lot of people will actually respond positively if you give a positive impression. In terms of limiting interactions or whatnot, now that depends on your relationship with that individual, because you do have toxic people. And they can be within your family, they can be within your friend circle, you want to try and limit those interactions with those kind of individuals as much as possible, because yes, they will cause you distress. They will cause you to react in certain ways that you don't want the fitna to come out, right? So, you just maintain your distance with them. And here's the thing, people are intelligent. Never assume that people are not intelligent. Everyone has intelligence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given everyone intelligence. See, stupidity is not a lack of intelligence. Stupidity is an inability to use intelligence. Someone who doesn't use their intellect is now considered a stupid person. So everyone has intelligence. So in time, they should be able to adjust themselves to say, I think the reason why the other person is keeping distant from me is maybe because they didn't like the way I approached them or something. And, ultimately they will want to change themselves just to accommodate them. And you'll find people will actually come back to you and they'll be nice to you or they'll be welcoming to you to try and resolve that matter. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Who was that?
That is my daughter.
That's okay. Now, so, distancing but not breaking of ties. In fact, I think that's one of the questions that was asked to me before by somebody else. And I'll read it out because it's also going to help answer your question as well. So they asked that about blameworthy outwardly and inwardly inconsistencies in relationship. For example, being able to overlook the flaws and have a friendly relationship with one person because they're nicer and friendly and kinder to you, but they're not with another person because they're not actually being nice and kind and friendly to you. So you're kind of attracted in friendliness to the person who's being friendly to you. And that's the same case in terms of them responding to you. It's how also you respond to them. So if you're attracted to somebody because they're being nice to you, then you also have to understand that others will be attracted to you if you're nice to them. You see, so what are you doing about it? And not so much as what are they doing to you. Everyone's internal state is different. Please give general advice and tips on how to determine what part exactly in your nafs could be limiting you, or some component that is underdeveloped that is not letting you move to a higher level in your relationships with others. Don't want a plateau, want to be willing to move past the comfort zone to be better for Allah's pleasure. So there are many factors that go into that. Some of those factors are cultural. In terms of family, for example, there's a certain way, a certain etiquette, a certain tradition that each family will have established within themselves in terms of the modus operandi, right? How you interact with each other. And then there are certain things that are extended to the community. And then there are other things that are extended, like within the tribe, for example, or ethnicity. And then there are certain things that are just general. So common courtesy, you could say. So if somebody greets you, then you greet them back, right? Or you prompt the greeting. Why wait for the other person to prompt the greeting? If you're going into a shop and somebody's coming out, you hold the door for them and give them the courtesy to come out. You don't just walk in and whatever, let the door bang in their face. So common courtesy and stuff like that. You go to a restaurant and you call the waiter. You don't do that, right? You have some common courtesy and you call the individual, like, excuse me or something. You don't go to somebody's house and sit like a donkey on their couch. You sit respectfully and you show the other person respect. So it begins with you. If you want something from someone, then you need to reflect that in you. The same case goes for marital relations. If you want your spouse to change towards you in a certain mannerism, then you need to reflect that change for them. If you want them to be nice to you, you need to first make yourself nice to them. You don't say, no, I'm going to wait until the other person shows me respect because I deserve it. See, that's the self-talking. You see, or I'm the elder. And this is where a lot of elders also, they lose out with the younger generation. And that's a very bad attitude to take. You see, the elder feels like I'm the elder and I have a certain respect, and he has to show me respect, or she has to show me respect, my niece or my daughter or my nephew or my son or whatever. That's a bad approach to take. The Prophet ﷺ never took that approach. I'll give you an example. There's a time he asked Ibn Abbas, his cousin, who's younger than him, and he asked him to do something. And Ibn Abbas, he was in his own frame of mind, he just said no, and it sounded very rude. Really, like he told of the Prophet, no, I'm not going to do it. Now that's the Prophet of Allah. What did the Prophet do? He didn't start saying, oh, you're disrespectful and that's not how to relate with your elders and I'm the Prophet of Allah and you need to show me respect. He didn't do that. He just smiled and then he went away. And you recognize, okay, maybe he's not in the right mood right now. Maybe something else on his mind. Maybe you can come back to that later on. You have to also learn to let go of certain things that are petty in order to maintain the relationship. Because if you keep bringing petty issues into the picture, you're never going to resolve anything. These are those semantics and those small things that we talked about this in the second session with Abu Zayd al-Balki's text. He said that in the very introduction. Let go of these petty things because they're going to keep bringing you down, you see. You need to learn to let go of the small things and focus on the big picture. And be tolerant and say, okay, fine. That person is not in the mood to relate with me right now. That's fine. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. He went away. Later on, he asked Ibn Abbas, did you do the thing that I told you to do? And Ibn Abbas suddenly, he felt like the guilt overcome him. And no, I'll do it right now. And he went ahead and did it. You see? And then the relationship in that case, even though it was slightly broken in that first instance, it's quickly repaired in the other instance. You don't want to be in a situation whereby you keep holding on to those petty issues. Oh, he did like this to me. Or he didn't even offer me a cup of tea. Or he didn't even say thank you when I gave him that. If you held on to those things, that's your nafs. That's your soul doing it, yourself. That's your shahwa and your ghadab. That's the bottom aspect of it. Intellection should give you wisdom, because knowledge, Imam Ali said, knowledge endows you with wisdom. You see? So if you intellect well, if you use the knowledge that you have well, and our tradition, by the way, just the seerah of the Prophet alone, the life of the Prophet ﷺ is enough for everyone to understand how they should conduct themselves. By knowing their proper place in relation to themselves and in relation to others. That's knowledge. Knowing your proper place to each individual. And just observing the character of the Prophet is enough. Imam Ghazali makes a point to insert dedicate a book in the Ihya to the character of the Prophet. And everyone should read that. Because that's where akhlaq comes in. The Prophet ﷺ said, I was sent but to improve the good manners. To just make people more relatable with others. And when you implement that in yourself, before criticizing the other person for how they're not maintaining a relationship with you, you need to criticize yourself for what is your shortcoming in terms of that relationship. And whether or not now you can make a decision whether you want to relate with that person or not. Naam. I hope I answered both your questions in that one stone that I threw.
Yes. Jazakallah.
I know this guy who would never smile.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that he did not like me at all in this Ramadan. I said Assalamu alaikum. He said no smile till the end of Ramadan. But I thought after that smiling is charity. Why would you not want to smile in the blessed month? I find that students of deen not acknowledge you till they become Hafiz Ramadan.
Well, that, I don't know, maybe it's just the person's personality. I cannot speak on that. But there are people like that, they probably have their mind elsewhere, or it's just not in their nature to be tolerant. And again, there are people, and this is the unfortunate thing, many of the ulama we have today are unfortunately like that. They're arrogant with their knowledge. That's this thing about it. They are arrogant with their knowledge. They will not acknowledge anybody below them unless they have like a personal affiliation or something. They won't. They will not acknowledge. I met with someone, and I won't mention his name, at a conference, and I went personally to greet him because I had read some of his research papers and they helped me in my own research. So I went to greet them and just, have a friendly conversation with them to say, I benefited from your work. And I wanted to show them some of my work to show them how I benefited from their work. And the person wouldn't give me 2 cents, wouldn't give me 2 seconds of his attention. He was sitting there with his phone, just looking elsewhere. He didn't even look at what I was presenting to him. So, and this is a huge scholar, and he's famous. He's famous. He's there on YouTube. He's got his whatevers and everything. So he's there, and didn't give me 2 seconds worth. So I said, "Khair, it's up to you." And on Eid day, I met somebody at the masjid he was affiliated with the imam, and because he was speaking Turkish and I didn't understand what he was saying, he got frustrated and then he just walked away, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I understand why he got frustrated, because he's talking to me, he's trying to engage me in conversation, but I can't respond because I don't understand the language as well. So I couldn't understand what he was saying, and he thought that I was being insulting to him. So again, I had to recognize there that this is also my shortcoming. Later on, I met up with him and I told him, just ask your forgiveness. I didn't mean to be rude. I just don't understand what you're saying. I managed to say that much at least. So sometimes you'll find characters who are actually deliberately ignorant and arrogant because of their maqam, whatever title they have before their name and after their name and everything. And sometimes it's just the moment didn't click, you brushed off the wrong shoulder or you started off on the wrong foot. So you can have that. But don't judge a person's heart in this case. Don't say that person is in their heart, there's something wrong. Don't do that. You just look at the outward. And here's the thing, the better position to take is husn al-dhan. Have a good opinion. Don't have a bad opinion of that person because you don't know. You see, they could be in a state of mind where maybe they're not paying attention. It's happened with me and it's happened to other people as far as I'm concerned as well. Someone could be asking me a question or something and I might be focused, my thoughts are drifted off somewhere else and I don't respond to them and it seems insulting, you see. And I don't have any bad intentions towards them. So it could be happening with you in this case also. They're not paying attention to you or they didn't see you or something of the sort. Just give husn al-dhan and let it go. Don't let it come back and bug you. So that you now start trying to formulate a judgment and trying to figure out, why didn't he respond to me and why didn't they, do like this to me? Because you're trying to find out a why, and this thing will keep on bugging you in your head. It's going to keep on coming up again and again, you see, and it's going to turn into a cancerous thought. Inshallah, we'll talk about the mind later on and the different kinds of thoughts. Yes, Roshan, yes, go ahead. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. A little bit, yeah, but I think we can manage. Where are you? You're in Morocco right now.
Hopefully you
MashaAllah.
can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
I have that situation happened to me many times when I moved to my new house and I did not get along with my neighbor. I was pretty angry at the very beginning, but then gradually over years, with listening to what other people are saying and attending lessons, I changed a lot. I tried to find out how I can respond in a better way. To my mind, I tried to find why that person is acting in that way by basically questioning him, not invading his personal space, but questioning him in a way that to get to the point why the person is doing it. And also now I even go further and maybe this is what a lot of people who do in him. I should not respond to that. Keep my hands off it and see if that's the case, right? So, but my solution would be try to respond in a better way than what he's doing. If he's parking his car, right, on my property, for example, or on my property line, so I would try to speak, I would let him do it for a while, and then once the occasion comes when he's in a good mood and is happy, then I would point that to him, right? And I would be very cautious at saying that if I do the same thing, I park my car on the property line, we both won't be able to open the door.
Well, here's the thing about in such cases like your neighbors, the best practice is a friendly practice, especially if you moved into a new neighborhood, or that new neighbor has come into your neighborhood, because the thing is, you at the end of the day you have to live together. Whether if you're living in separate houses, doesn't matter. You still have to live together, and you want to try and establish friendship or at least friendly relations as early as possible, instead of letting time go, and then you've got issues in which you have to end up trying to resolve those issues. So best practices are always things that you want to do in the very beginning instance to establish a friendly relationship. The first thing that we did when we moved into our place is we got in touch with the neighbors and we gave a small hadiah as a small gift, some sweets and stuff, just to establish a friendly relationship, and so that you at least, if you do have an issue, and you will have issues, it's not like you will be stepping on each other's toes, you've already broken the initial barrier of communication. You can resolve those issues easily enough. But in a case whereby something like that has happened, then naturally you're now faced with the option of, first of all, at least trying to evaluate what the issue is, like what's troubling the other person. My personal experience, going back to our previous place we used to stay in Toronto, the next door neighbor never interacted with us, never communicated, never did anything. And then at one point in winter, the driveway was packed with snow, so I had to park on his side, and he got very upset. Like as soon as I parked on his side, he just came outside and started shouting and yelling. And I recognized that he's probably, because the shouting and yelling, I understood that to be a reaction. He was reacting to something. So, I took it for half an hour. I just stood there, let him go with it, with a blank expression on my face, a stupid expression. I let him go through with it, the whole thing. And then he finished his whole thing, and then he went back inside. And I kept on doing my work. I was shoveling the driveway. And then 2 minutes later, he comes out with his shovel and decides to help me clean up my driveway. Sometimes just something like that can just help overcome whatever issue it is that he was holding on to. And once that was done, he was then able to explain to me, what issue he was having per se with me personally, and we were able to resolve it. So sometimes being quiet about it will never help you resolve the problem. You need to be able to at least engage with them in some way or the other, to evaluate what is it that's bothering the other person to have a negative attitude towards you, and then to decide and see what best practice you can implement. This is your wisdom now coming in to help resolve that negative attitude. Now,
Equate map master with neocortex. Where is neocortex?
come again?
Could we equate map master with neocortex?
No.
Where neocortex map in the brain.
The map master is not the neocortex. The map master in what Ghazali is saying is the memory now, the center portion, like the amygdala and the hippocampus. That is the map master, the long-term memory that gathers the information and pieces it together. The semantic memory and the episodic memory, the events that are occurring in the world in which the events are occurring, the environment and what components were in the environment. That's the map master. The neocortex is in the frontal part of the brain, the frontal lobe. That's the quwa al-khayal. That's where the thought process begins now, because the information is coming in, the interpretive process is beginning, and that's being correlated with the map master who is putting the pieces together. So the brain is processing and the memory is storing. Yeah.
Where does overthinking or overusing the mind fall in all of this?
Overthinking
Or overusing the mind?
or overusing the mind. Well, we're not talking about the mind in this case. We are talking about the brain. That's our subject of discussion today. We'll talk about the mind in a much more future session. So overthinking is now, it's not a brain function, it's more of a mind function. Overthinking is more of a mind function. So if you've got something, for example, you're working on, and the equation is pretty simple, it's 2 + 2 = 4, but then you want to do sine and cos and tan and 2x minus this one and that one and the other. You're bringing in too many factors into the formulation of your thought. That would be overthinking. But the brain is just being used as an instrument to do that. So yes, you are going to get a headache because the brain is overfunctioning, but the thinking itself is done by the mind. The aql is doing the thinking. The dimagh is instrumenting or facilitating the thinking. So when the mind is thinking, its formulation of thought is done in the frontal cortex. That's where it gets the information from the senses. If it wants to recall the imago that's been formed, it will access it from the middle portion of the senses, of the brain. So overthinking is a component of the mind whereby you are trying to tackle on too many particulars to try and resolve something, or you're looking at too many semantics, or you're actually lost in semantics, so you're trying to resolve them all in order to formulate an understanding. That's an overthinking. Now, anyone else? Anything else?
So we said the neocortex is part of the frontal lobe.
Yeah. Anyone else in the...
May I ask?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So in neocortex, as I understand, it's also doing some kind of sorting
Come
of
again?
data. Some kind of sorting of data.
Yes.
So, and then the frontal lobe, as I understand, is like something that's very sequentially. So it's just taking the data sequentially.
So yeah,
Is it?
the neocortex is part of the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe has got other components. Two primary components is the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex, then right behind that is the neocortex. Those are part of the frontal lobe, and they will actually do both of those functions that you've mentioned: the sorting of the data, and then keeping it in its appropriate sequence.
Okay. I'm sorry because it's not my field. So
No, I understand. I understand because No, I understand. I actually rushed through the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. But, thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. Anybody else who's confused on that, don't worry about it. Just ask your question, and if you want me to clarify, because I understand this is not something you can absorb in one sitting like that. And I condensed everything into one session. So
Yeah, it was
if
too quick.
if you want me to repeat, no problem. Just ask.
Okay. Thank you.
Now go ahead, Tim. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Ustaz.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I would like to ask you a question regarding the brain damage.
Mhm.
Can the physical condition with the brain damage can influence the thoughts, or the soul, the nerves? Can it can influence
Yes.
somehow?
Yes, it will influence any sort of trauma that happens on the body will directly influence the soul. And so any trauma that happens on the brain will directly affect the aql's ability to think. So sensory perception, so if somebody hits you right on the front of the head, sensory perception will be disoriented or will be crippled. So one of the things, for example, if you get struck on the head like blunt force trauma, if you go to the emergency room, they'll take a torch and they will shine it in your eyes to see whether or not your senses are responding, right? So they'll affirm, okay, sensory perception is correct. Then they'll ask you questions to sort of see whether or not you're able to relate. Like, can you see, like, how many fingers am I holding? Like, they'll put the finger there and try to move it this way and that to see if the eyes are following that. They'll do a few tests which are known as cognitive tests, and because it will affect a number of things. So somebody who gets hit on the back of the head will experience something like amnesia, for example, or will experience, let's say, like either long-term memory loss, like they'll forget everything that happened in the past, or they will experience something like a short-term memory loss. So let's say you got hit on Thursday on the back of your head, you will not remember anything from Thursday onwards. That's a short-term memory loss. So anything from last week Thursday till today, you won't be able to remember it, but you'll remember everything before that. So you'll remember your name, you'll know how to speak because those are words you learned a long time ago. You'll remember some dates, but you won't remember what happened on Friday, or what happened on Saturday, or what happened on Sunday. Or if somebody tells you right now something, you'll forget it immediately. That's a short-term memory loss because that portion of the brain has been affected. Same case for long-term memory loss. And then same case for now, depending left side or right side, which side you got hit, will affect your ability to calculate things, like to be able to measure something or to estimate distance or something like that, quantitative stuff. Or your ability to speak, or your ability to be artistic. You'll lose, maybe if you are an artist and then you got hit on that side of the brain, you might actually lose that talent because your brain is no longer able to coordinate that. So it will affect your intellection. Any effect on the body will affect the soul, meaning any effect on the brain will affect the intellection.
One more question, sir. In Russian psychology, there is a theory that with the word one can be healed, and with the word one can be killed. So, as at the university, the teachers told us that it's possible to heal by just the words, and it's also possible to kill just by words.
Yes.
So in this case, if somebody not unconscious, for example, he can't grasp, he can't understand, but he can understand, for example, himself, like his conscious inside himself.
Yes.
So is it possible to get the, let's say, the healing process, so to get out of the trauma, let's say?
Yes. Oh yes. Yes, definitely. So people will, you see, it depends on what kind of trauma. Sometimes somebody will experience something traumatic in their life and they will close in on themselves and they don't want to talk anymore, they don't want to interact anymore. But they will listen, at least. And so depending on what words are used, that person can actually come out of that state. Because that's what language does, right? Araba, abara. Language has the ability to transcend or transform an individual from one state to another state. The Sahaba went they healed a sick person with Surah Fatiha. And then they came back and reported it to the Prophet ﷺ. And this is what we did. We didn't have anything else. This is what we did. You know? There was another instance. There was a healer in India. He was doing ruqya. And ruqya, by the way, doesn't just work for like jinn possession. Ruqya can also work for psychological disorders. It can actually help you heal a psychological problem. So that's what he was doing. And there was a sitting professor who was, he was skeptical about that. So after, he went in for the session to observe and take notes, and then he said, this is some trickery that you're playing on them. Like, words cannot actually heal somebody like that. And so the sheikh, he called him a donkey. He called the professor a donkey. And he got upset. And then he called him a pig. And he got he was raging, how dare you do that to me? And so the sheikh said, how can you say that words, can't affect anyone? 2 words I've spoken to you and you're ready to kill me. So words can change you from a positive state to a negative state. And vice versa, from a negative state to a positive state. There's a fable about a king who went to a wise man, to the sage, and he complained that my wife she's always falling sick. And all the healers of the country, of the empire, the kingdom, they can't figure out what's wrong with her. I really need you to help her. I want you to come with me to the palace. He said, there's only one solution for your wife, for the queen. And I don't even need to be there. You can do it yourself. So he asked him, what is it? And he said, give her the meat of the tongue. So he went and he got his whatevers, and they got the tongue of a goat and fed it to her. No effect. He came back. He said, give her the meat of the tongue. So he went and got a sheep, and they sacrificed it and gave her the meat. He went back again, no effect. He said, give her the meat of the tongue. So he went back, he did a cow, no effect. He said, now this guy is pulling my leg. I don't know what kind of games he's playing. So he grabbed the sage and brought him over to the palace and told him, get serious now. Stop playing games with me. So he said, you didn't understand. When I said the meat of the tongue, I meant speak to her, with kind words. Speak to her in sweet words. That's the meat of the tongue. And so the king started doing that. And then over a few days, she started responding. She started coming out of her depression. It's very interesting. Ibn Sina had a case similar to that. There was a woman who was dying, and they couldn't figure out what was the issue. The healers were examining, and they couldn't find any physical cause of death. Why is she dying? It's a long process that she was withering away, withering to death. So Ibn Sina came to her, and she was an elderly woman, and so he inspected her and he started checking her pulse. So while he was checking her pulse, he was asking her questions. Now Ibn Sina was a psychologist, so you have to understand his techniques are different. So while he's doing that, he's asking her questions about, where are you from? And what about your family? And what about your husband? And so on. And then he talked about love and falling in love. And when he said that, he felt her pulse spike. So he picked up on that and he started asking her questions along those lines. And until he came to get it out of her about someone whom she had fallen in love with before, and was never able to like be married with that person. And that person died. So that was the khawf, not the khawf, it was more like she was depressed because of that. So every time he would ask her a question about that, he would feel the pulse would quicken. And then he came to the conclusion, and that's what's actually bothering her. And after a few days of that session, she actually started showing signs of improvement because it was in her and nobody knew, and she herself didn't know that. Like she had received the news and it put her in a state of, she didn't know that that's what was causing it or causing her situation. But she started getting better after that. It's very interesting. I mean, it's true. What, words do have the effect of changing people from one state to another. I mean, looking at the manipulative side of it, you open your social media and look at the kind of posts that come. I did this experiment on myself. I would time myself for 30 minutes, go through my Facebook feed, and I would take a picture of myself before and I would take a picture of myself afterwards. And I would note my state, my mood before I did that, and then my mood afterwards. And my mood would be bad every time I did that because of the nonsense that would just keep showing up on that. You know, that whatever I would see and read on that would just change me from one stage to another. And people do that. I mean, all these manipulations, they bring up the post, the algorithms that are designed for all these social media, that's what they're meant to do. They're meant to prompt a reaction. You know, they're meant for you to do something, to keep you engaged, for you to click next, for you to scroll back further down, for you to behave in a certain way, for you to have a certain political opinion. You know, so if you're somebody, let's say they have your search history and you're somebody who Googles a lot of conspiracy stuff, they'll keep on bringing up conspiracy stuff on your newsfeed because they know that's what reacts you that's what you react to. Anyway, go ahead.
Lay people often still recognize the force.
Jazakallah khair.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Lay people often still recognize the forced imagery or natural progression being imposed on them, but maybe too quickly use the excuse of we're majboor.
They will actually do that. People will actually do that.
Sheikh Imam related about Sahaba reading Surah Fatiha on a sick man and he was cured. Yaqeen.
Yes, that's the one that I was talking about, the Surah Fatiha.
Inside that causes pulse rate higher.
What happens inside that causes so like in the case of that, the woman who, so remember again, going back to the basics, whatever transpires in the soul will manifest in the body. Whatever transpires in the body will manifest in the soul. So whatever thoughts you have will have a certain inclination, will have certain symptoms that will come out on the outside. So in the case of that woman, for example, she was thinking about the person that she used to love. Now, when you love someone, you know, the intimate connection has an effect on the heart, on the physical heart as well as the spiritual heart. And it has an effect on other parts of the body as well, like your eyes, for example. The pupils will dilate, you know, certain things like your cheeks will flush. Those are all indicatives of ishq, of falling in love. So that's what, like, the pulse quickens in that case because the excitement is high when you're in close proximity with that person or you are remembering that person. Maybe you're remembering some good memories about that person. You will automatically smile because that's a reaction. So what's internal is what you're thinking, and then what's external is the reaction to that thought. So you will have positive reactions or negative reactions. If you're thinking about somebody who wronged you, then you will have a negative reaction. Your fist will clench or something, I don't want to talk about that person or something like that, right? That's a negative reaction. So the pulse rate will increase. And pulse rate doesn't increase just because you had a good memory about someone you love, but it could be also to a negative emotion as well. The hadith that, but yes, the Sahaba did recite, and this is mutawatir. It's not something like, oh, you know, this, maybe it's that. No, it's mutawatir because you had a group of companions, And then you had testimony from those who got healed as well. And the Prophet ﷺ affirmed it. They did recite Surah Fatiha and that person did actually get cured. Which is, I mean, if you have faith, then it will work. If you get injured, you are in traumatic situation, you're in any kind of distress, Surah Fatiha will give you tranquility, assuredly. Well, and that doesn't mean that you don't go to the doctor, by the way, because there have been characters who have done that. Oh, Surah Fatiha is all I need. So he's sitting there with cancer and Surah Fatiha is all I need. No, you don't do that. You're bleeding half to death and you want to recite Surah Fatiha. No, you have to tie your camel, and you have faith in Allah, but you tie your camel. You have trust in Allah, but you tie your camel. So you read Surah Fatiha, you recite it, and you believe it in your heart that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure you, but you do what He has set out for you and the means that He has put in place for you. If you look, He says in the Quran, if you want to recite the Quran, seek refuge in Allah. If you want to recite the Quran, seek refuge in Allah. And then right after that He says that from the shaitan. And then right after that He says He doesn't have any authority over those who believe and those who trust in Allah. So why would He do that? Why would He say shaitan can't affect you so long as you have iman, but then He still tells you to seek refuge in Allah? In other words, what He's saying is that He will protect you if you take the means He has put in place for you. So you don't just sit in the masjid and say, Allah will feed me since He's feeding the ants and the birds as well, and so, food is just going to come to me. Allah will sustain me. No, you get up and you go out and you seek the means to earn your livelihood as well, but you trust in Allah that He is going to give you the nourishment that He has set out for you. What was the other question? There was something else about majboor. There's something else.
Lay people often still recognize the forced imagery or natural progression being imposed on them, but maybe too quickly use the excuse of we are majboor.
Yes, they will do that. And I've heard people do that. But that's when they are actually confronted by it. When you actually prompt it in front of them and say, by the way, do you know that this is exactly what's happening? They'll give excuses like, well, I don't have a choice now, do I? This is what the world is like, isn't it? This is the progression. This is what I spoke about earlier. Like they have it in their mind now that this is a natural progression. And by the way, it affects adults in one way and it affects children in another way. What effect it has on adults, if given enough time, can be cured. Like you detach from all that and you go into a retreat, 6 months to a year, you can be healed from that. What happens to children, I will write this down and I will sign it for you. You cannot cure it. It's permanent damage. Forced imagery. Those who are listening to this, to me saying this, you guys and whoever else is going to listen to it afterwards in YouTube and whoever it reaches this message to, you giving your phones and your tablets and your things to your children to sit there and look at these forced imagery, the damage that it's doing to your children is permanent damage. I'm not speaking out of ignorance. They've done studies and they've proven this thing. There's the science to back it if you want the science to give you proof. If you want dalil, you want evidence. It's there. The very people who run these organizations and these platforms and make these contents, they don't let their own children sit in front of them. And you people are the ones who are doing it deliberately, giving your children this. The damage that it's going to do to your children is going to be permanent damage. You can't reverse that. You're making your own children stupider. You're making your own children consumptive husks and reactive husks. This is the reason why your children are aggressive towards you. It is the reason why your children cannot control themselves. They don't have discipline. They don't have proper speech patterns. They don't have any motor skills to begin with at that early age. At that very early age, they're already losing their eyesight. Their senses are already diminishing because it's all forced imagery. You're not allowing your child to develop in a natural manner of abstracting reality, to make, to bring out reality and make the effort to help improve intellection. Many of these children, they can't speak properly. Their speech is slurry. They can't pronounce words properly. They can't even hear words properly in their pronunciation. Their speech, ultimately, whatever develops from it is not proper, it's not intellective speech. It's whatever speech, that stupid cartoon it is that you put in front of them, that's the speech they're going to use. You can't expect these children to then later on memorize the Quran or recite proper Quran or to stand in salah properly, even that, for that matter. They can't, they don't know how to dress properly. They don't know where their aura is and where they're supposed to. You see all these young teenagers now, these millennial kids and whatever, coming to the masjid wearing tracksuit pants and whatever caps and t-shirts, and their backside is showing when they go down in sajda. This is lack of discipline in our community. Don't blame the kuffar. This is your fault, parents. This is your fault. And you will be answerable for this on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Whatever your child ends up in, because that child is innocent. They'll be held accountable for their own actions when they reach the age of puberty, yes. But the damage that you've inflicted because of that, you will be answerable for this. Now, sorry, that was a rant. Go ahead.
It's also implied to emotional damage done to children as well.
Oh yeah. Because look at the kind of garbage that's coming up and what's being instilled in the children now. Look at what the media is projecting, especially in the West, about all this LGBTQ whatever nonsense that is coming up. You know? What do you think is happening to the fitrah of the children? Because children at the first stage of 7 years are pure fitrah. They don't actually have intellection until they now start crossing over 7 into... We'll talk about this in Imam al-Haddad's section of the lives of men. I'm gonna break it down for you. The 7 years, and then the next 7 years up until the age of 21, then 21 to 40, and then 40 to 60. We're gonna talk about these stages, inshallah, in detail. But first of all, subhanallah, really, we have become corruptors of everything, not just the land. These are innocent souls, and the kind of emotional damage it does to them, it's tremendous. Because these children now, especially children born in the last 5 years, where now at today's time, like they're 5 years old, they're crossing over, the 6 and 7, where the intellect is now developing, and they have got, no measure of fundamental or rudimentary control over their lower aspects of their self, concupiscence and their aggressiveness. When they reach their teenage, they will have no master over emotions. They will have no master over emotions. It won't matter to them what is right and what is wrong, and the guilt of wrong and the shame of wrong. It won't matter to them. Those who are already in their teenage years, they barely can sustain a relationship. Teenage years, those are the years in which now all these different kinds of emotions start coming up. And mingling in society is when they actually start experiencing things like ishq. And they start establishing friendships that would last them a lifetime, but they can't even hold on to those. Because they never learned the true virtue that they were supposed to learn. And in fact, virtue is not something that's learned, it's something that's nurtured. But they didn't imbibe that in themselves, because their entire attention, instead of abstracting from reality, instead of observing, okay, this is how my father relates with my mother as a son, and as a daughter, this is what my mother does or relates with my father, or this is how my mother conducts herself, or this is how my father speaks. They didn't do that. They were busy here. They weren't watching that. They were here. This is this is where you have to, because they're not looking at that. They're looking at this. I don't know how else I can spell it out. How much more simpler do you want me to say it? They're here. Their eyes are here. Their ears are here. They're not in reality. They cannot see what they're supposed to see. They cannot, because children are absorbed, they absorb reality. They don't learn. You can't teach a child, okay, when somebody says please, you have to say thank you. They don't know what that means. But when they see the father doing it, they will accept that. Okay, my dad did this, so I should do that. They see the mother doing it, they'll do that. If the mother and father themselves don't conduct themselves with morals and ethics and virtue, you cannot expect the children to do the same. And if the mother and father are going to be stupid enough to do this for their children, put them in front of this unit, you cannot expect the children to be any different. They'll be worse than that. Again, I'm going into that rant. I'm sorry, this actually makes me very angry because I see this and I've seen this in my own family with my own relatives doing it. And you know, it pisses me off. It makes me very upset. So, sorry, alhamdulillah. Okay, I've been given the indicator of time, so if there's no other question, we can end for tonight. Okay, let's close session for today. And inshallah, we'll resume next week. Next week, like I said, is going to be now, we'll be looking at the howness, how to balance, how to find the balance. What happens when it's depleted, what happens when it's inflated, when it's depleted, and how to maintain the balance. So that's going to be our discussion next week, inshallah ta'ala. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
وعليكم السلام شكرا جزيلا
جزاك الله وإياك
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته
وعليكم السلام